in the primordial darkness before time itself held meaning. When chaos reigned supreme and the very concept of order remained but a distant dream, there existed forces so ancient and terrible that even the gods who would later rule Olympus trembled at their names. This is the story of Zeus, the Thunderer, the Sky Father, the King of gods, whose dominion would stretch across the heavens, and whose influence would shape the destiny of mortals and immortals alike for countless millennia. But to understand the magnitude of his reign, we must first journey back to an age when Titans walked the earth and the fate of the cosmos hung in the balance of a father's terrible hunger. Long before the golden halls of Olympus gleamed beneath the eternal sky, the universe groaned under the tyrannical rule of Kronos, the youngest and most cunning of the Titans. This primordial deity had seized power through an act of unspeakable violence, castrating his own father Uranus with an adamantine scythe forged in the deepest reaches of the underworld. Yet even as Kronos revelled in his newfound dominion over time itself, a prophecy echoed through the cosmic void that would haunt his every waking moment and poison his dreams with visions of inevitable doom. The oracle had spoken with crystalline clarity, her words cutting through the fabric of destiny like lightning through storm clouds. One of Kronos' own children would rise against him, just as he had risen against his father before him. The cycle of violence that had defined the cosmos since its birth would continue, and the king of Titans would fall to his own flesh and blood. This knowledge transformed Kronos from a triumphant ruler into a paranoid monster, his mind consumed by the singular obsession of preserving his power at any cost. When Rhea, his sister and wife, bore their first child, the goddess Hestia, Kronos' response revealed the depths of his madness. Without hesitation, without a moment of paternal affection or divine mercy, he seized the newborn deity and swallowed her whole. The act sent shockwaves through the cosmic order, for never before had a god devoured his own offspring. Yet for Kronos, this horrific deed represented the only path to maintaining his stranglehold on universal authority. One by one, the children of Kronos and Rhea came into existence, and one by one, they vanished into their father's insatiable maw. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, disappeared before she could taste her first breath of celestial air. Hera, destined to become queen of the heavens, was consumed moments after her divine birth. Hades, future lord of the underworld, and Poseidon, who would one day command the seas, both suffered the same terrible fate. Each birth brought Rhea unspeakable joy, followed immediately by devastating anguish as she watched her husband's jaw unhinge to accommodate yet another innocent victim. The Titaness endured this cycle of creation and destruction with growing desperation, her maternal instincts warring against her helplessness in the face of Kronos' overwhelming power. She pleaded with her husband, appealed to whatever remnants of compassion might still exist within his corrupted heart, but the King of Titans remained unmoved. The prophecy had to be prevented, regardless of the cost in divine blood or familial bonds. But destiny, as the ancient Greeks understood all too well, cannot be thwarted by mortal or immortal will. When Rhea felt the stirrings of new life within her womb for the 6th time, she knew that this child would be different. The very fabric of reality seemed to pulse with anticipation, and even the most distant stars appeared to lean closer to witness what was to come. This unborn deity carried within his divine essence a power that would reshape the cosmos itself. As her time approached, Rhea's desperation transformed into cunning determination. She would not allow this child to share the fate of his siblings. Under cover of darkness, she fled to the island of Crete, that mystical land where the boundaries between the mortal and divine worlds grew thin. There, in a sacred cave hidden deep within the mountains, surrounded by the ancient magic that permeated the island's very stones, she gave birth to Zeus. The moment of his arrival was marked by portents that echoed across creation. Thunder rolled through clear skies, lightning illuminated the depths of the cave with supernatural brilliance, and the earth itself trembled with recognition of the new god's presence. The infant Zeus possessed an aura of authority that transcended his apparent helplessness, and even in those first moments of life, his eyes held the wisdom of ages and the promise of power beyond mortal comprehension. But Rhea's triumph would be short-lived if Kronos discovered her deception. With tears streaming down her divine cheeks, she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes, imbuing it with enough divine essence to fool even the king of Titans. Then, steeling herself for the performance that would determine the fate of the cosmos, she returned to her husband's presence. Kronos awaited her with the same terrible hunger that had claimed 5 of their children. His eyes gleamed with anticipation as Rhea approached, the disguised stone cradled in her arms with all the tenderness of a grieving mother. The Titaness's acting proved flawless, her sobs of anguish entirely genuine as she surrendered what appeared to be her 6th child to her husband's monstrous appetite. Without examination or hesitation, Kronos seized the bundle and devoured it completely. The stone passed down his divine throat and settled in his stomach alongside his 5 imprisoned children, and the king of Titans smiled with satisfaction. Once again, he had cheated fate and preserved his dominion over the universe. The prophecy remained unfulfilled, and his reign would continue for eternity. Meanwhile, in the hidden cave of Crete, the infant Zeus began his secret childhood under the protection of mystical guardians who understood the cosmic significance of their charge. The Curites, ancient warriors whose bronze shields and spears had witnessed the birth of civilization itself, surrounded the cave with their protective presence. Whenever the baby god cried, they would clash their weapons together, creating such a tremendous din that the sound would mask his voice from any who might seek to locate him. The nymphs of the sacred groves became his nurses, providing him with the nectar and ambrosia that would fuel his divine growth. But most remarkably of all, the goat Amalthea offered her milk to sustain the future king of the gods. This humble creature, blessed by fate itself, would be remembered throughout eternity for her role in preserving the deity who would bring order to chaos and justice to the world. As Zeus grew from infant to child to young god, his power manifested in ways that filled his guardians with both wonder and trepidation. Lightning danced between his fingers like playful serpents, and thunder followed his every movement across the cave floor. The very air around him crackled with barely contained energy, and those who looked into his eyes saw reflections of storms that could reshape mountains and seas, that could swallow continents whole. Yet alongside this awesome power grew a wisdom and compassion that set him apart from the tyrants who had ruled before him. Zeus understood even in his youth that true strength lay not in domination, but in protection, not in fear, but in respect. The young god's education extended far beyond the nurturing care of his divine protectors, for the very island of Crete seemed to conspire in preparing him for the destiny that awaited. Ancient olive groves whispered secrets of diplomacy and statecraft as their branches swayed in the Mediterranean winds, while the labyrinthine caves beneath the mountains taught him the value of patience and strategic thinking. Every sunrise brought new lessons, every sunset new revelations about the nature of power and responsibility that would one day rest upon his shoulders. During these formative years, Zeus encountered beings whose wisdom had been forged in the earliest days of creation. The Titaness Metis, daughter of Ocean and Tethys, became perhaps his most influential teacher. Her mind contained knowledge that spanned the breadth of existence itself, from the smallest movements of mortal hearts to the grand machinations of cosmic forces. Under her tutelage, Zeus learned that true victory required not merely strength, but cunning, foresight, and an understanding of the intricate web of cause and effect that governed all things, Metis spoke to him of the delicate balance that maintained the universe, how even the mightiest ruler must sometimes yield to preserve the greater harmony. She taught him the art of seeing multiple paths through any crisis, of understanding his enemies not through hatred, but through careful observation of their motivations and weaknesses. Most importantly, she helped him recognize that the prophecy which had driven his father to such desperate acts was not a curse to be feared, but a natural progression toward a more just order. As Zeus approached the threshold of divine maturity, his presence could no longer be completely concealed from the cosmic forces that governed fate itself. Whispers began to circulate among the lesser deities and spirits who dwelt in the borderlands between mortal and divine realms. Some spoke of strange lights seen dancing above Mount Ida during the darkest hours of night. Others reported that the very stones of ancient shrines hummed with an energy they had not felt since the days when Kronos first claimed his throne. These rumors eventually reached the ears of beings who served the King of Titans in various capacities. Yet Kronos, secure in his belief that he had successfully thwarted destiny, dismissed such tales as the fevered imaginings of lesser minds. His confidence had grown absolute over the passing years, reinforced by the apparent silence of the prophecy that had once tormented his every thought. The stone he had swallowed remained peacefully in his divine stomach, alongside his imprisoned children, and the universe continued to bend to his will without challenge or rebellion. This hubris would prove to be the first crack in the foundation of his seemingly impregnable rule. For while Kronos celebrated his victory over fate, Zeus was discovering abilities that transcended anything the Titan King could have imagined. The young god found that he could commune with the fundamental forces of nature itself, calling forth storms with a gesture and commanding lightning to dance at his pleasure. More significantly, he possessed an innate understanding of justice that allowed him to see through the lies and deceptions that propped up his father's tyrannical regime. The moment of revelation came when Zeus, now grown to the full majesty of divine adulthood, stood upon the highest peak of Mount Ida and gazed across the world that lay spread beneath him like a vast tapestry. He saw mortal cities where humans cowered beneath the arbitrary cruelty of Kronos' rule, their prayers for mercy echoing unanswered through the heavens. He witnessed the suffering of countless innocent beings who bore the weight of a cosmic order built upon fear rather than justice. In that instant, the future king of the gods understood that his destiny was not merely to fulfill an ancient prophecy, but to heal a wounded universe. Yet Zeus possessed enough wisdom to recognize that righteous anger alone would not be sufficient to overthrow the established order. Kronos commanded legions of titans, whose power had been forged in the primordial fires of creation itself. These beings had witnessed the birth of stars and the shaping of continents, and their loyalty to their king had been cemented through eons of shared conquest and domination. Any direct assault against such forces would require allies whose strength could match that of the Titans themselves. The young god's first step toward assembling such an alliance came through his reunion with Metis, whose role would prove far more crucial than even she initially understood. The Titaness had observed Zeus's growth with increasing admiration, recognizing in him qualities that had been absent from divine rulers since the earliest days of creation. Where Kronos ruled through terror, Zeus inspired through example. Where the Titan King demanded absolute submission, the young god sought willing cooperation based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Metis agreed to serve as Zeus's primary strategist and counselor, bringing to their cause not only her vast intellect, but also her extensive knowledge of the Titan's strengths and vulnerabilities. Together, they began to craft a plan that would strike at the very heart of Kronos' power, while minimizing the cosmic devastation that would inevitably accompany such a conflict. The key, Metis realized, lay not in matching the Titans' brute force, but in turning their own nature against them. The Titaness devised a potion of incredible potency, one that would exploit Kronos' fundamental weakness. The king of Titans had grown so accustomed to consuming whatever he pleased that he no longer questioned the nature of what passed his lips. This habit, born of absolute power and unchecked arrogance, would become the instrument of his downfall. The potion would not harm Kronos directly, but would instead cause him to regurgitate everything he had swallowed in his paranoid quest to prevent the prophecy's fulfillment. While Metis perfected her alchemical masterpiece, Zeus began the delicate work of reaching out to potential allies whose grievances against the current order might overcome their natural caution. The Cyclopes, those master craftsmen who had been imprisoned in the depths of Tartarus since the earliest days of Kronos' rule, represented perhaps the most valuable potential supporters. Their skills in forging divine weapons were legendary, and their hatred for the Titan King, who had condemned them to eternal darkness, burned with the intensity of their cosmic forges. The hundred-handed ones, the Hecatoncheires, languished in similar captivity despite their potential as warriors capable of reshaping the very landscape of battle. These primordial beings possessed strength that could move mountains and speed that could outrace the wind itself. Yet they had been relegated to the deepest dungeons of the underworld simply because Kronos feared their power. Zeus understood that liberating these ancient allies would require him to venture into realms where even gods feared to tread. The journey to Tartarus demanded courage that transcended mere physical bravery, for the underworld's depths contained horrors that could drive immortal minds to madness. As Zeus descended through the layers of reality that separated the world of the living from the realm of eternal punishment, he encountered guardians whose very existence challenged the boundaries of comprehension. Yet his determination never wavered, sustained by the knowledge that the fate of the universe hung in the balance of his success or failure. The Cyclopes, when Zeus finally reached their prison, greeted their liberator with a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. Brontes, Sterops, and Arges had endured countless ages of torment, their creative spirits slowly withering in the absolute darkness of their confinement. The sight of Zeus, radiating divine authority and genuine compassion, rekindled hopes they had thought permanently extinguished. In return for their freedom, they pledged not only their loyalty, but their greatest creations. The thunderbolt they forged for Zeus represented more than mere weaponry. This divine artifact contained within its crystalline structure the concentrated essence of cosmic justice itself. When wielded by one whose heart remained true to the principles of fairness and protection, the thunderbolt could channel the fundamental forces that maintained universal order. In Zeus's hands, it would become both sword and scepter, the ultimate symbol of righteous authority, backed by irresistible power. For Poseidon, the Cyclopes created a trident whose prongs could command the very foundations of the earth and the depths of every sea. This weapon would allow its bearer to shake continents and summon tidal waves that could reshape coastlines. But more importantly, it represented dominion over the life-giving waters that sustained all existence. Hades received a helmet of invisibility, crafted from materials that existed partially outside the normal flow of reality itself. This artifact would grant its wearer the ability to move unseen through any realm, whether divine or mortal. The Hecatoncheires, those titans whose very names inspired terror in the hearts of lesser beings, emerged from their eternal captivity transformed by centuries of righteous anger. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges had once been forces of pure destruction, but their imprisonment had refined their fury into something far more dangerous, to tyrannical rule. Each possessed 50 heads that could perceive threats from every direction simultaneously, and 100 arms that could wield weapons with precision that defied mortal comprehension. When Zeus freed them from their adamantine chains, their gratitude manifested as an oath of loyalty that would endure beyond the destruction of stars themselves. The alliance that formed in those deepest dungeons of creation represented more than mere military cooperation. Zeus had accomplished what no ruler before him had even attempted, bringing together beings whose fundamental natures had been shaped by entirely different epochs of cosmic development. The Cyclopes embodied the raw creative force that had shaped the physical universe, while the Hecatoncheires represented the chaotic energies that had preceded even the most basic concepts of order. Together with Zeus's own mastery over the forces of sky and storm, they formed a trinity of power that could challenge the established cosmic hierarchy. Yet even as these alliances solidified, Zeus understood that victory would require more than overwhelming force. Kronos commanded not only the loyalty of his fellow Titans, but also the fundamental structures of reality itself. Time flowed at his command, space bent to accommodate his will, and the very laws that governed existence had been shaped by his eons of unchallenged rule. Any direct confrontation would take place on a battlefield where the Titan King held every conceivable advantage. The solution lay in subtlety rather than spectacle, in patient misdirection rather than glorious assault. Zeus would need to position himself not as a conquering invader, but as a welcomed guest, close enough to Kronos to deploy Metis's carefully crafted potion before the Titan King could recognize the true nature of the threat. This deception would require acting abilities that transcended mere performance to become a fundamental reshaping of his divine presence itself. Metis transformed Zeus's appearance through divine magic that reached into the very essence of his being. The thunderous power that normally radiated from his form was carefully concealed beneath layers of misdirection that made him appear to be nothing more than a minor deity seeking employment in the Titan's household. His lightning-bright eyes were dimmed to the soft glow of starlight, his commanding voice modulated to the respectful tones of a humble servant. Even his divine aura was compressed and hidden, leaving only the faintest trace of the cosmic authority that was his birthright. The persona Zeus adopted for this infiltration was that of a cupbearer, one whose sole responsibility would be to serve wine and nectar to Kronos during the elaborate feasts that mark the Titan's celebrations of his continued dominion. This role would place him in intimate proximity to his target while simultaneously rendering him virtually invisible through the simple expedient of appearing utterly harmless servants. After all, were rarely noticed by those they served, their presence taken for granted like the air itself. Gaining entry to Kronos' court required navigating a labyrinth of divine bureaucracy that had grown increasingly baroque during the Titan's reign. Lesser deities who served as administrators and functionaries examined Zeus's credentials with the pedantic thoroughness of beings whose entire existence revolved around maintaining the established order. Each stamp of approval, each signed document, each ritual of acceptance brought him closer to the heart of enemy territory, while simultaneously demonstrating the ossified nature of Kronos' government. The palace of the Titan King existed simultaneously across multiple dimensions of reality, its architecture defying comprehension through its fusion of crystalline mathematics and organic impossibility. Walls that appeared solid from one angle revealed themselves as transparent membranes when viewed from another perspective, while corridors that seemed to stretch for miles could be traversed in a single step by those who understood the spatial paradoxes governing their construction. This was a structure designed not for comfort or beauty, but for the display of absolute power over the fundamental nature of existence itself. Within this impossible edifice, Zeus observed the daily routines of his father's court, with the careful attention of a strategist studying enemy fortifications. The Titans who served as Kronos' advisors and generals moved through their duties with the mechanical precision of beings who had long since abandoned any pretense of independent thought. Their loyalty had been purchased not through inspiration or shared vision, but through the simple calculus of survival under a regime that tolerated no dissent. The Titan King himself proved to be a figure of tragic magnificence, his once noble features twisted by paranoia and the weight of countless millennia of absolute rule Kronos spoke to his subjects not with the warmth of a beloved leader, but with the cold authority of an entity who viewed all other beings as potential threats to be monitored and controlled. Even his most trusted lieutenants approached him with the careful deference of courtiers who understood that a single misinterpreted gesture could result in exile or worse. During these weeks of careful observation, Zeus witnessed scenes that strengthened his resolve while simultaneously filling him with profound sadness for what his father had become. He watched Kronos arbitrarily reverse decisions that had taken months to implement, simply to demonstrate that his will superseded any notion of consistent governance. He observed the Titan King's growing obsession with consuming everything that might potentially threaten his rule, a hunger that had expanded far beyond his original fear of prophetic offspring to encompass entire categories of beings and objects. The moment for action arrived during the celebration of Kronos' victory over a minor rebellion that had emerged in the outer territories of his domain. The Titan King's mood was expansive, his guard lowered by wine, and the intoxication of renewed triumph over those who dared question his authority. As cupbearer, Zeus found himself in the unique position of being able to approach the throne without triggering the elaborate security protocols that normally surrounded the cosmic ruler. The potion Métis had created was a masterwork of alchemical precision, its effects calibrated to exploit the specific divine physiology that distinguished Titans from other immortal beings. The liquid itself was colourless and odourless, indistinguishable from the finest nectar, except for a subtle luminescence that could only be detected by those who knew exactly what to look for. Mixed into Kronos' wine, it would remain completely undetectable until the moment its effects began to manifest. Zeus approached his father's throne with the measured steps of a servant who had performed this ritual countless times before. His hands remained steady as he poured the wine, his expression maintaining the perfect neutrality expected of one whose sole purpose was to serve without question or comment. The weight of cosmic destiny seemed to crystallize in that single moment as the goblet passed from son to father, carrying within its depths the instrument of prophetic fulfillment. But the passing of the goblet from son to father was only the surface of what truly unfolded in that moment, for all of creation seemed to hold its breath as the liquid touched Kronos' lips. Though the Titan King noticed nothing unusual, the fabric of the universe trembled with a subtle shift that rippled outward like the first vibrations before a world-shattering quake. For ages, the cosmos had endured Kronos' stifling grip, a reign that froze progress and smothered possibility. Under his suffocating dominion, time behaved not as a flowing river, but as a stagnant lake, unmoving and uneasy. Mortal lives faltered in strange rhythms. Seasons drifted unpredictably. Even the stars seemed dimmer, as though wary of shining too brightly beneath the gaze of the tyrant who ruled them. But now, with the potion settling inside him, the first fractures formed in that unnatural stillness. Across distant lands, strange omens sprouted without warning. In the highlands of Thessaly, shepherds watched in astonishment as newborn lambs took their first steps fully grown, skipping the fragile innocence of birth, as if some cosmic hand had toyed with the natural order. On the shores of the Aegean Sea, the tides retreated miles beyond their usual reach, exposing ancient stones etched with runes forgotten by even the oldest nymphs. Far away in the dense forests of Arcadia, nymphs mid-dance found their limbs arrested, frozen in delicate poses as trees around them dropped every leaf in a sudden golden cascade. Even the constellations, those eternal witnesses etched across the heavens, flickered with unease. Stars brightened, dimmed, then brightened again, shifting into subtle new arrangements, as though signalling the arrival of a long-anticipated transformation. It was as if all the universe had finally sensed what Kronos himself, blinded by paranoia and arrogance, failed to see. Destiny had awakened, deep beneath the earth, in the cavernous prisons of Tartarus. The Cyclopes stirred. Brontes, whose single blazing eye could perceive disturbances far beyond the reach of mortal sight, felt the tremor before any other. He lifted his head and murmured into the darkness, "It has begun." His brothers Steropes and Arges exchanged grim looks, for they too had waited countless ages to feel such a shift. Somewhere far above them, the young god who had sworn to free them had taken his final step toward fulfilling the prophecy whispered at the dawn of time. Within Kronos' impossible palace, a structure that twisted through dimensions, a labyrinth of corridors that could expand for miles or collapse into the span of a heartbeat, the atmosphere grew thick and uneasy. Servants paused in their tasks without knowing why. Advisors shifted on their massive thrones carved from the bones of ancient beasts. Even the oldest titans, whose power had been forged in the first fires of creation, felt a faint, inexplicable dread. Kronos alone ignored the warning signs. He reclined upon his throne in drunken satisfaction, laughing thunderously at the entertainment unfolding before him. For the briefest moment, he paused, placing a hand upon his abdomen as an odd sensation curled within him. But he dismissed it with a grunt and a smirk, too enamored with his own confidence to imagine that he, the defier of Uranus, the devourer of gods, could ever be vulnerable. Yet deep inside him, the magic of Métis was awakening. The potion seeped into divine flesh, weaving through his essence like smoke slipping through cracks. It stirred ancient memories he had tried to forget. Memories of the moment he had taken power through violence, of the prophecy that had haunted him since the beginning, of the fear he had swallowed alongside each child. Now, all that terror returned in a single, suffocating wave. A faint rumble echoed through the hall. At first, only the keenest among the titans noticed. A vase trembled. A golden chalice rattled against the stone surface of a banquet table. Decorative pillars made of starlight flickered momentarily, and then the sound came again. Louder this time, the musicians faltered. Laughter died. The air thickened with an unspoken awareness that something was wrong, something profoundly different from the usual tempests of the Titan King's moods. Kronos shifted uncomfortably. A violent shiver coursed through him, and for the first time in countless millennia, he felt something he had nearly forgotten: fear. His hand gripped the arm of his throne, knuckles turning white, veins pulsing beneath skin that once seemed impenetrable. He tried to rise, but the potion clawed upward like a beast set free from chains. His face contorted as pain rippled through his colossal frame. The court watched in stunned silence. Titans who had long believed their king to be unassailable, untouchable, immune to all forces in existence. Then Kronos released a roar that shook the very foundations of reality. The palace walls warped, space buckled. Time itself bent around him as the Titan King's divine body fought a battle it could not win. The potion surged through him, forcing him to gag, convulse, and choke as millennia of lies and swallowed futures clawed their way back into the world. His attendants rushed forward, offering aid, but he lashed out blindly, sending them hurtling through pillars and collapsing entire sections of the hall. The Titans recoiled, unsure whether to help or flee. Kronos staggered, each breath a thunderclap, and then the inevitable happened. With a sound that echoed across every plane of existence, the Titan King vomited forth the stone that had deceived him, the swaddled rock he had once believed to be Zeus. It shot from his mouth like a comet, crashing into the far wall with enough force to detonate a crater. Before the shock could fully settle, another convulsion seized him. He vomited again. This time, something far more extraordinary emerged. A god, fully grown, furious, radiant, stumbled forward from Kronos' collapsing form Poseidon. His trident-shaped aura crackled around him, eyes blazing with ocean's wrath. Then came Hades, cloaked in shadows that curled around him like serpents. Then Hera, regal even in her fury. Then Demeter, her hair crowned with wheat that sprouted instantly upon the palace floor. And finally, Hestia, flame-hearted and resolute. The children of Kronos had returned, not as infants, not as helpless, but as gods forged in suffering, hardened by injustice, and united in righteous fury. The moment they stood together shoulder to shoulder, the air changed again. A new power filled the space, the raw, electric potential of a future that had finally broken free from the chains of a tyrant's fear. For the first time, Kronos saw not children, not threats, but gods whose combined power eclipsed even his own. His throne quaked, his eyes widened, his breath shook, and Zeus, still disguised as the humble cupbearer, stepped forward. The disguise melted away. Lightning burst from his skin in brilliant arcs. The air thundered as he revealed himself in his full divine majesty. Zeus, son of Rhea, born of prophecy and hidden in shadows, now stood revealed before the tyrant who had tried to erase his existence. And Kronos understood too late that destiny had arrived. For a heartbeat, a single, suspended instant in the endless flow of cosmic time, neither father nor son moved. The air between them crackled with a tension more ancient than language. Kronos stared into the face of the child he believed he had destroyed, and Zeus stared back at the being who had swallowed his siblings whole and ruled the cosmos through terror. Around them, the newly freed gods steadied themselves as the shock of rebirth gave way to rising fury. Kronos tried to speak, but only a fractured rasp escaped him. "You..." He choked, pointing a trembling finger at Zeus. "I consumed you." Zeus's voice rolled through the hall like thunder breaking across mountain peaks. "You consumed a stone, father, a lifeless decoy. You swallowed fear itself and called it victory." Lightning gathered behind him in spirals that seemed to twist through dimensions. Each bolt cast harsh shadows across the crystalline walls, as though the palace itself recoiled from what was unfolding. Kronos staggered backward, his face contorting with disbelief, rage, and something else. Something he had not felt since he had overthrown Uranus' helplessness. For the first time in his reign, Kronos felt the choking grip of inevitability closing around him. He had spent eons devouring the future to preserve the present, but now the future stood before him in living, blazing form. "You should have never been born," Kronos roared, and his voice cracked the marble beneath his feet. "You should have never existed." "And yet I do," Zeus answered. The words were calm, but the storm gathering behind them was not. The palace shook again as titans leapt to defend their king. Hyperion summoned roaring solar fire that poured from his palms in golden streams. Crius let loose a barrage of cosmic shards, sharp enough to shred the very air. Coeus shifted reality in waves that threatened to crush Zeus's form into nothingness. But before the attacks could land, Poseidon stepped forward, fresh from the Titan's stomach and burning with newfound strength. He slammed his foot upon the palace floor and the ground split apart, a roaring chasm swallowing Hyperion's fire and scattering the shards of Crius like dust in the wind. Seawater erupted upward as if summoned from the bones of the earth itself, flooding through the cracks and pushing back the cosmic assaults. Hades swept his hand through the air, and shadows surged outward like a living tide. They wrapped around Hyperion's blazing aura, dimming the Titan's light with the chill of the underworld. His eyes flickered in shock as the shadows tightened, siphoning his strength. Hera, Demeter, and Hestia stood united, their divine auras intertwining in a blazing trinity: hearth, harvest, and sovereignty. Their combined presence radiated a force that pushed the lesser Titans back with terrifying ease. For a moment, the court of Kronos faltered under the sheer magnitude of Olympian power rising all at once. Yet the Titans were not simple creatures to be overwhelmed so swiftly. Iapetus hurled himself into the fray with an earth-shattering bellow, tearing columns apart and turning them into weapons of impossible weight. Oceanus summoned tidal waves the size of mountains that crashed through the dimensional palace, merging with Poseidon's own power in a chaotic war of waters Atlas, towering above all others, moved with the inevitability of a collapsing star, his fists generating shockwaves that tore rifts in the air. Kronos regained enough control to lift his scythe, the same weapon that had once defeated Uranus. Its blackened blade hummed with the echoes of old violence. Even weakened, the Titan King radiated a primal force that made the universe tremble. The scythe was not merely a tool. It was a symbol of an age, a weapon forged from fear, rebellion, and the blood of a god. Zeus extended his hand. The thunderbolt formed instantly. Forged by the Cyclops in the depths of Tartarus, it pulsed with cosmic law. Its glow flooded the hall, washing the world in unbearable brilliance. The Titans hesitated at the sight, for even they felt the power of that weapon, a power they had not seen since the universe was young. Kronos glared at the thunderbolt with absolute hatred. "So," he snarled, "the prophecy unfolds." "It does," Zeus answered, "but not as you believe. I am not here to repeat what you did. I am here to end what you began." And with that, the Titanomachy truly began. Battles erupted across realms as the scythe of Kronos clashed with the thunderbolt of Zeus. The strike sent shockwaves through the cosmos, splitting mountains, boiling seas, and silencing stars for a heartbeat. The entire palace warped under the pressure. Dimensional corridors twisted, gravity reversed, and time buckled violently as king and usurper clashed. Titans poured into the fray with the fury of beings who had shaped the world itself. But the Olympians, fresh, determined, unbroken, met them head-on. Poseidon's trident collided with Oceanus's infinite oceans, creating storms no mortal language could describe. Hades battled Iapetus in a whirlwind of shadows and stone. Hera shattered Crius's cosmic shields with divine sovereignty alone. All the while, Zeus and Kronos moved like storms in human shape, their weapons tearing open the fabric of existence. Kronos summoned the full might of time itself. Epochs collapsed. Moments rewound. Millennia folded into seconds as he attempted to trap Zeus within a loop of infinite unmaking. But Zeus broke through with relentless determination, his thunderbolt cutting through temporal storms as though they were mere fog. "You cannot win," Kronos bellowed, voice cracking with rage. "I am time." "And I," Zeus answered, "am the future you tried to swallow." Lightning exploded around him, arcing across the battlefield like living serpents of pure radiance. Kronos staggered under the onslaught but refused to fall. Every step he took distorted reality, turning sky into earth and earth into sky. The war raged for years, for seconds, for centuries, time itself unraveling as Kronos fought to preserve his throne. The universe bore deep scars from their conflict. New mountains rose, oceans reshaped, islands cracked open, and entire species emerged or vanished overnight. And still, Zeus fought on. Still, the Olympians rose. Still, destiny tightened its grip around the Titan King's throat. Finally, weakened, battered, and bleeding golden ichor, Kronos faltered. For the first time in his eternal life, he fell to his knees. He lifted his gaze towards Zeus, the child he had tried to erase. "This world was mine," he whispered. "It was," Zeus said softly, "and now it becomes something greater." Zeus raised the thunderbolt. The palace trembled. The Titans gasped, and the age of Kronos came to an end. The blast of the thunderbolt did not simply strike Kronos. It consumed the very essence of his authority. Light erupted outward in a blinding torrent, flooding every hall of the Titan's palace, searing through its impossible architecture and ripping open the seams between realms. Titans shielded their faces as the brilliance washed over them, but even they could not fully withstand the force of Zeus's power unleashed. Kronos screamed. Not in pain alone, but in the shattered realization that the dominion he had carved through blood and terror was slipping from his grasp. The scythe fell from his hand, clattering against the floor with a resonance that echoed across dimensions. The ancient weapon's power diminished instantly, its deadly aura flickering like a dying star as the last of Kronos' strength bled away. The Titan King's colossal form trembled. His golden ichor spilled across the shattered marble, glowing like molten sunlight as it pooled beneath him. He tried to rise, tried to lift his hand, tried to command the world as he once had. But his limbs no longer obeyed him. Time itself, the very force he embodied, broke away from his control. The air around him no longer warped, moments no longer bent to his will. He could feel time, cold, impartial, ungoverned, slipping through his fingers like sand from a broken hourglass. Zeus lowered his arm, thunderbolt humming softly in his grasp, and approached the fallen Titan. His siblings stood behind him, battered but unbroken, their divine auras flickering with triumph and exhaustion. The Titans who had opposed them shrank back, unsure whether to fight, flee, or simply bow before the dawning of a new age. Kronos glared up at Zeus, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is this mercy?" "No," Zeus replied, his expression unreadable. "This is justice." The ground cracked open beneath the Titan King. A massive fissure tore across the palace floor, revealing glimpses of Tartarus, a swirling abyss of fire, shadow, and eternal unrest. The cries of ancient beings rose from the depths, their voices merging into a wail that pulsed with primordial fear. Kronos' eyes widened as gravity shifted beneath him. "No! No!" he roared, scrambling back, nails gouging into the marble as he fought the inevitable pull. "You would condemn me to the pit I kept for others?" Zeus's voice thundered through the collapsing hall. "You forged Tartarus as a cage for those you feared. Now it becomes the cell for your own tyranny." Kronos grabbed desperately for anything, a pillar, a chunk of stone, even the air itself, but the abyss tugged him downward with the hunger of a cosmic predator, sensing an overdue meal. Time, now freed from his grip, seemed to accelerate the fall. A horrifying realization washed over the Titan's face as he understood the irony of his fate. He, who had devoured the future, had been consumed by it. With a final cry that rattled the stars, the King of Titans vanished into the gaping rift. The fissure sealed itself immediately, swallowing the sound of his scream, until the hall settled into an eerie stillness. For the first time since the birth of the cosmos, the universe stood without a Titan King's silence. Only the quiet crackling of residual lightning remained. Zeus turned toward the Titans still standing. Hyperion, bruised and scorched. Themis, shaken but proud. Oceanus, panting from the tumultuous clash of forces. Many had fought loyally for Kronos, but many others had simply followed out of fear. Zeus raised his thunderbolt, not as a threat, but as a proclamation. "The age of Titans has ended," he declared. "A new order rises, one not built upon terror, but upon balance. The world will no longer bend to one tyrant's dread." Atlas, towering above the others, stepped forward in defiance, though his body bore the marks of battle. "And if we resist," he growled. Zeus met his stare without flinching. "Then you will suffer the weight of your choices." The air shimmered, reality bent. A punishment befitting Atlas's pride formed around him. A sphere of the heavens themselves, vast, heavy, eternal. With a rush of cosmic wind, the orb descended upon his shoulders. Atlas staggered as its unimaginable weight pressed down, locking him into his fate, to hold the sky aloft for all eternity. The other Titans, horrified, bowed their heads. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Zeus had become something Kronos had never achieved. A ruler, not a devourer, not a tyrant, a king. Zeus turned to his siblings, and the battlefield seemed to exhale as the last echoes of war faded. Poseidon stepped forward, trident glowing like a shard of the ocean's heart. Hades emerged from swirling shadows, his presence chilling yet dignified. Hera stood tall, her eyes sharp with the knowledge of the future she would shape Demeter, and Hestia glowed with warmth, their auras already healing the fractures in the world. "We have won," Zeus said quietly, "but our work begins now." The palace of Kronos groaned, then shattered crystalline walls dissolved into stardust. Dimensional corridors collapsed inward, and the throne that had ruled the cosmos for millennia disintegrated, leaving behind only a swirling mist where power once sat. The Olympians stepped out onto what remained of the threshold as the palace crumbled away into the void. The sky stretched wide before them, endless, glittering, waiting. "Where will we rule?" Hestia asked softly. Zeus gazed upward, beyond the clouds, beyond the shattered realm they had fought in. High above the mortal world, a peak rose so tall it kissed the heavens. Mount Olympus, radiant, untouched, waiting like a blank page, ready to bear the story of a new age. Zeus lifted his thunderbolt, and its light arced across the sky, igniting the peak with divine brilliance. "There," he said, "our age begins there." The Olympians ascended, leaving behind the ruins of the world that had enslaved them. The gods had risen, a king had taken his throne, and the universe at last could breathe again. And the universe at last could breathe again. In the silence that followed the fall of the Titans, a strange and sacred stillness settled across creation. It was not the stagnant stillness that had haunted Kronos' reign, not that heavy, suffocating pause where time dared not move forward. This was different. This was the breath drawn after a long nightmare, the gentle sigh of a world awakening from centuries of fear. The winds carried a new cadence. The stars shone with renewed brilliance. Even the deep ancient earth seemed to hum softly, as if acknowledging that a new age had arrived at last. But though Zeus and his siblings had defeated their father, restoring freedom to a universe oppressed since the dawn of time, victory did not mean peace. The aftermath of war stretched before them like an uncharted sea, vast, unknowable, full of unseen challenges that would test them in ways no battlefield ever could. The Olympians stood on the precipice of a new world, but a new world demanded order. It demanded structure. It demanded a ruler strong enough to guide the fates of gods and mortals alike. Zeus knew what must come next. He raised his thunderbolt once more, not in violence, but in declaration. And the heavens answered. Clouds swirled around him in rings of gold and silver, spiraling upward toward the distant summit of Mount Olympus. It was as though the mountain itself recognized him, calling to him as a throne calls to its rightful king. Poseidon stepped closer, his trident resting against his shoulder. "Brother," he said, his voice echoing like waves against distant cliffs, "we have won the war. But what of the world we've inherited? The seas will not calm themselves. The lands will not shape their borders without guidance." Hades emerged from the shadows beside them, the faint chill of the underworld preceding him like a whisper of winter. "And what of the dead?" he asked. "Kronos has devoured countless lives. His tyranny fractured the cycle of existence. Souls wander without destination. The underworld must be restored." Zeus surveyed his brothers, understanding that while they had fought as a unit, their domains must never overlap in conflict. Harmony required separation, not distance of affection, but boundaries of influence. The world will be divided, Zeus said, not in discord, but in balance. We three shall govern creation through unity, not fear. Poseidon nodded, eyes glimmering like storm-tossed oceans. Then grant me the waters, he said. Give me the depths and the tides, the rivers that feed the earth and the storms that roam the horizon. And I, Hades said quietly, will take the realm beneath, the kingdom of spirits, where the dead may find rest and justice. Zeus lifted his thunderbolt toward the sky. And I shall rule the heavens, he declared. I shall command the storms, the winds, and the sky itself. As long as justice governs my hand, the world will endure. And with that, the Fates, who had watched silently from the shadows of eternity, emerged, their ancient looms humming, with the soft resonance of destiny reweaving itself. They approved the division with a nod, and vanished once more into the tapestry of existence. The universe shifted, the waters bowed to Poseidon, the earth opened its gates to Hades, and the sky crowned Zeus with lightning. But long before Olympus could rise into its golden age, scars of war demanded healing. The land was broken, mountains cracked, valleys flooded, rivers rerouted. The chaos of the Titanomachy had reshaped the world like a sculptor striking marble with a hammer too forceful. The Olympians stood at the dawn of a new era, but the dawn was still clouded by smoke. Demeter stepped forward, kneeling to press her hand against the wounded earth. Instantly, green life sprouted beneath her fingers. Wheat, barley, olives, all bursting forth in vibrant renewal. The people of this world will not survive on the ashes of battle, she murmured. Let the harvest return. Let life return. Hestia, warm-hearted and gentle, summoned flames of pure, comforting light. Let homes be rebuilt, she whispered. Let hearth fires burn once more in peace. Hera watched with quiet pride, understanding that her role, queen, protector, guardian of marriage and order, would be the glue that held the pantheon together. We are more than conquerors, she said. We are creators, builders, guardians. Together, the gods walked the earth, mending what had been broken. Rivers carved new beds, forests rose again. Seas retreated from lands drowned in the chaos of titanic conflict. Mountains lifted their heads proudly into the sky. Creation was not returning to what it had been. It was becoming something new. Yet, as with all victories, whispers of resentment lingered. Some titans had survived the war, spared not out of compassion, but out of necessity. Themis, goddess of divine law, approached Zeus and bowed. Order must be established, she said, for even gods require laws. Zeus welcomed her counsel. She would later stand by his throne, scales in hand, guiding him toward fairness when wrath tempted him otherwise. But other titans were not so cooperative. From the far edge of the world came murmurs of dissent. Some titans refused to bow, others plotted in secret. The remnants of Kronos' loyalists scurried like shadows beneath the light of Olympus, nursing their wounds and sharpening their hatred. Though the Great War was over, the seeds of future conflict had already been planted. Zeus sensed this. He sensed, too, that gods, though powerful, were not immune to ambition or jealousy. A throne invites loyalty and treachery in equal measure. And as the throne of Olympus took shape, Zeus felt the weight of a crown heavier than any weapon he had ever wielded. But he did not shrink from it. He embraced it. For in Zeus burned not only the fury of lightning, but also the hope of a world that deserved better than the fear Kronos had offered. With the world restored and the realms divided, Zeus turned his gaze upward once more, toward the peak where Olympus waited. Its summit glowed with a divine radiance, as though forged by the first dawn ever born. Zeus ascended the mountain, each step echoing like a promise. Poseidon and Hades followed behind him, not as rivals but as brothers whose fates were woven with his Hera, Demeter, Hestia, each climbed in silence, their hearts steady and their futures bright. Behind them came the wind spirits, the nymphs, the lesser gods, and the children of light who had helped shape the victory. When they reached the summit, the heavens opened in brilliant welcome. Clouds gathered beneath them, like a throne of living silk. The sky shimmered, parting as though saluting its new ruler. Zeus took his seat upon a throne carved from marble and stormlight, a throne that pulsed with ancient truth and newborn possibility. His siblings gathered around him, forming the first circle of Olympus, and the world below felt the shift. Mortals lifted their heads from their fields, sensing that something had changed in the air. Their prayers, once fearful, cold, whispered only in desperation, rose now with hope. They felt the presence of gods who did not devour them, but watched over them. The age of Olympus had begun, and with it, the era of heroes, legends, and tales that would echo through countless generations. Now the gods stood poised not as conquerors, but as custodians of a world filled with infinite potential. They had carved their domains from the bones of chaos. They had survived betrayal, swallowed futures, and a father who feared them. They had forged themselves anew from the ashes of a dying age, and the universe, freed at last, began its long journey under their rule. Kronos drained the cup without hesitation. His attention focused entirely on the elaborate entertainment being performed before his throne. The wine passed down his throat and into his divine stomach, where it joined the remains of countless meals, and unknown to him, the still living forms of his 5 imprisoned children. For several minutes, nothing seemed to change. The celebration continued, the music played, and the Titan king showed no signs of discomfort or suspicion. Then the potion began its work, and the universe trembled as destiny finally claimed its due. Kronos convulsed upon his throne as his divine stomach rebelled against its unnatural contents, forcing him to regurgitate first the stone he had swallowed in place of Zeus, then each of his 5 children in reverse order of their consumption. Poseidon emerged first, followed by Hades, then Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia, all fully grown and burning with righteous fury at their father's crimes. The titanomachy that followed would reshape the very foundations of existence, a war that raged for 10 years across every realm of creation until Zeus and his siblings stood victorious over the broken forces of the old order. From that cosmic crucible emerged the golden age of Olympian rule, with Zeus ascending to his rightful throne as king of the gods. He would govern not through the terror that had defined his father's reign, but through a complex tapestry of justice, wisdom, and divine authority that balanced the needs of mortals and immortals alike. His thunderbolt became the ultimate arbiter of cosmic law, while his many loves, rivalries, and interventions in mortal affairs would spawn legends that echo through eternity. The great halls of Olympus now gleam with the light of his eternal rule, where Zeus sits enthroned among his fellow gods, his eyes ever watchful over the world below. Heroes rise and fall at his whim. Kingdoms flourish or crumble according to his judgment, and the very seasons turn in obedience to the cosmic order he established in him. The ancient Greeks found not merely a god to fear, but a divine father, whose complex nature reflected their own understanding of power, justice, and the eternal struggle between chaos and civilization. And so ends the tale of Zeus the Thunderer, the Sky Father whose reign transformed the universe from a realm of tyrannical oppression into a cosmos where even the mightiest must answer to justice. His story reminds us that true authority comes not from the power to destroy, but from the wisdom to create, protect, and guide. As you drift into sleep, let the echoes of his thunder carry you into dreams where gods walk among mortals, where heroes forge their destinies, and where the eternal dance between order and chaos continues beneath starlit skies that have witnessed the rise and fall of ages beyond mortal reckoning.